This challenge is going to be very different from the videos I've done so far, and that's because it's for a very special occasion on the channel. That's right, like the title says, this channel now has over 10,000 subscribers. For me, that's a pretty big deal. It represents the first big milestone on the channel. So logically, to celebrate this milestone of subscribers, why not ask the subscribers and viewers themselves how I should go about the celebration? I left it up to you guys on the community tab to give me some silly ideas for objectives to complete in one big challenge video, and the ideas were quite varied. Some suggestions were pretty chill, like using certain types of weapons or attacks for an area, while others decided to give me the most unreasonable restrictions they could think of. And hey, while I'm not known for going for the most difficult builds on my channel, I think it's time I step up to some of the challenges you guys have offered me. Depending on how you see it, this challenge is either the most simple or the most complicated one so far. As you can tell, there aren't really any rules since I have multiple objectives to complete, and these objectives are limited to either an area or a boss. So once I've cleared an area and completed the objective, the restrictions will be lifted and I'm free to return to the area to farm for items or pick up anything I missed. Since that's everything, it's time to start the challenge, but first, we'll need an objective. So let's see what our first objective will be. I actually am going to start out with two objectives, one for a boss and one for an area. The first one is simple enough. All I have to do is beat Najka as the first boss. But of course, we can't get to her without a fragrant branch of yore, so we'll have to put that off for just a moment while we look at the other objective. This one says to go through an area, any area, using only jump attacks. I think that's a great way to jumpstart this challenge, so let's head out to the first area. Right now, the only thing we can do here is clear out enemies until we get 12,000 souls, so we can buy the branch off of Malentia. Once that's done, we can free Rosabeth to open the path to the Shaded Woods. While we're here, we have another objective we can do right away, so let's read it. Hear me out. No, don't. Black Knight Halberd, without the stats for it, also one-handed. I figured I could try this one against Najka and just see how it works out. Let's just get a feel for the damage we're doing. This isn't looking very promising so far. Without the stats to wield it, the fire damage that normally would melt her health bar is meaningless. Of course, I could always do the tail cheese, but where's the challenge in that? While I did attempt this for a while, I eventually decided that this would take too long, and switched to the bandit's knife since it at least guarantees a burst of 200 damage after several hits. That ended up being a good decision that saved me a couple of hours, and with that, we've completed our first objective. We gained a significant amount of levels from that, and as usual, I chose to prioritize ADP and Vigor before anything else. Back in the Forest of Fallen Giants, the jump attack only rule is still active. Since I was sticking to the same equipment throughout the level, I decided to challenge the Pursuer on the rooftop, something I haven't done in a very long time. Thankfully, I'm very familiarized with the Pursuer's moveset by now, and with those extra iframes from all that ADP, I jumped on the opportunity to finish him off here and now. I didn't forget to pick up the Estus Shard either. Now we can finally move on to the area boss. I'm gonna give the BK Halberd another shot here. If I couldn't make it work for Najka, surely I can make it work in the lowest level area. The damage is more or less the same against the last giant, but since he has less health, we're at least getting rid of enough to get yellow damage. Of course, in this case, we're locked into using only the jump attack, but that's fine by me. It has a cool animation and rarely misses its mark, as long as you properly align yourself with his legs before attacking. This was still a considerably longer fight, taking around 16 minutes to complete, but unfortunately, it comes nowhere near being the longest fight in the run. While I'm thinking about it, I should use these souls to get the necessary rings from Xiao Qua. Next, I'll get a few more levels, this time increasing my vitality. A new area means a new objective. This next one ended up being more fun than I anticipated, and it simply requested that I beat Dragon Rider without the cheese, with fists, or a broken weapon. I liked this idea since it changes up the usual rhythm of the Tower of Flame, and since I already looted a plethora of broken straight swords from the previous area, I put them to good use and dual wielded them for the entire area. I wanted to power stance them, but forgot that you have to hold the two-hand button to do that, so I was just cluelessly dual wielding them instead. Oh well, maybe I didn't have the stats to power stance anyway. That's a pretty cool mechanic though. The fact that you can choose between power stancing and dual wielding opens up a lot of moveset options. I'm glad that Elden Ring revived this to some extent. Surprisingly, the fight against the Dragon Rider was kind of fun. Maybe my idea of fun is a little warped, but I enjoyed the broken sword shenanigans. Even with the floor, he still scared me a few times and jumped dangerously close to the open window. But if that's what he wants to do, I guess I can't stop him. However, in the end, I lured him back to center stage where I put an end to this silly performance. I guess I got an inflated ego from that because once I touched the bonfire upstairs, I decided to impose my own little challenge by not resting at it, just to see if I could clear the rest of the level without refreshing my durability or Estus. I spent a very long time fighting the Drake with broken straight swords, and this dragged out so long that it somehow scooted itself all the way to the edge of the platform, where it promptly plunged to its death, drops and all. Yep, even reloading the area didn't bring back the drops. I just spent all that time fighting it in the most terrible way for nothing. I was definitely a little frustrated from that whole situation, so I ended up switching to unbroken broken swords for Old Dragon Slayer, and went in without Estus. Well, I guess I know how this fight's gonna go. I wasn't at full health before entering the Fog Gate, so I had to use my last life gem to top off, which was a shame because I certainly could have used that when I was frantically searching for a healing item at 1 HP. Thank goodness I had the Old Dragon Slayer to kindly stop me from impulsively wasting a Divine Blessing. After that, I lost patience with this guy and bought some life gems, using the meager damage from the Broken Thief Sword to finish the fight. I was able to come back with lots of souls to spend, using them to finish up with ADP and get vitality to 20. The next objective is an interesting one, and one that has surely been implemented into the Souls series many times. The challenge is called the Nuzlocke Challenge, and while it was originally created for Pokemon games, the rule can be applied to many other games in creative ways. Here, we can see that there are only two rules. First, we can only pick up one weapon in any given area, and second, if we die, the weapon we picked up is gone forever. Normally, if we run out of weapons, the run would be over. But since this is limited to a single area, we can be more lenient. So, I think to implement it here, I'll make it so that I can only have one type of equipment before death. So, one weapon, one shield, one piece of armor, and one ring. Of course, all of that has to be unequipped if I die. And if I get another copy of a weapon I lost later on, I can't use it. Hopefully that explanation makes sense, and we can proceed through the level. With my luck, the only piece of equipment I managed to get in a whole hour was the Royal Soldier's Ring. None of the enemies up to that point dropped a single item for me. But this wasn't even the end of it. I managed to clear out the level and make it to the ship without getting any drops. That's not very interesting, so I decided to stick around and 1v1 a few foot soldiers in hopes of getting a weapon, or even some gloves. After 2 hours, I finally got a foot soldier sword, and while I already had one from another area, I couldn't use it since it didn't drop from the enemies in this area specifically. Now that I have a weapon, I can finally challenge the area boss. To spice things up even more, let's do another objective as well. This time, we're gonna do backstep attacks only. The foot soldier sword has a pretty good backstep attack because it does a thrusting move that covers the distance between the player and the enemy. However, it has extremely low durability, so this attack will eat that up in no time, and of course, I didn't bring any repair powder. Due to the nature of this challenge, I can only do one attack at a time, so even if the damage is alright, the water will have plenty of time to rise, and I'll be slowed down for most of the fight. Once the sword broke, I kinda lost all my morale and repeated the same stupid mistake from last time. I was really angry at myself for this. I wasted 2 hours of farming and eliminated one of the few weapon drops I could get from the pool. To make sure I had a better chance of getting a weapon, I farmed the Darkstalkers this time and got the broadsword after a short farming session. The broadsword has respectable durability. At the very least, it has enough to last the whole fight. And while it does more damage than the foot soldier sword, the backstep attack isn't quite as safe, since it requires you to get much closer to the boss to actually connect. I didn't care about that though. I was so determined to beat this thing that I planned around my weapon's weaknesses. I was so scared of having to farm again that I topped off my health any time I took a hit. My tactics paid off in the end, and I was finally free from the clutches of the No Man's Wharf. Now that the Flexile Sentry is down, we have access to the Pyromancy Flame, which we'll surely need for other objectives down the line. Going into the Lost Bastille, we're gonna need an objective to complete. This one is basically the opposite of the challenge we just did. Instead of only using the first thing to drop, we have to use everything that drops. The Use What You Get challenge is a very popular one, and for good reason. It's a fun challenge that can be done at any level, and at the same time, guarantees to change up the usual pace of the game. In our case, it will once again be limited to one area. But the Lost Bastille is an expansive area with a diverse enemy layout and plenty of equipment to loot from the level, which should make for an interesting experience. We'll have a very convenient start right as we enter the area. All you have to do is light the torch to make Macduff move off the chest, then you are free to pick up the Craftsman's Hammer. For its low stat requirements, it does great damage, and even without any upgrades, it can easily carry you all the way to mid-game. However, my fun with it will not last, because I have to pass through a room of weapon chests to progress through the area. Sure, I could claim plausible deniability and say it was too dark for me to see the chests, but everyone knows those 3 chests are here, so the best I can do is hope I open them in the right order. The first one I picked up was the Bone Staff, which was only a formality since I replaced it with the Parrying Dagger after 5 seconds. The Parrying Dagger itself is a fun little gimmick weapon that I used to take out the enemies that followed me into the room. This leaves the Twin Blade, which I'll have to use for an indefinite amount of time, depending on my luck with enemy drop rates. I don't have nearly enough dexterity to wield it, so I'm just gonna live with it and do what I can to make it slightly viable. As I killed the nearby enemies in hopes of a new weapon, I made it to the Sinner's Rise, and started picking up some of the loot from there. Despite the fact that I've played this game a billion times, and know exactly what is down here, I still activated the damn illusory wall, knowing full well that I could have just run past it without seeing anything in it. I don't even think I did this on purpose. I'm just so used to clearing out everything that I absent-mindedly picked up the Northern Ritual Band despite not having any spells. So I just inadvertently imposed another challenge on myself because I can't help myself from opening everything like a disobedient child. Without magic, I get none of the benefits of the ring and all the drawbacks. And rules are rules, so I can't take it off. I have to just deal with the health reduction until I beat the Lost Sinner. I spent a long time farming for souls to get my dex a little higher, so I don't lose too much damage on my Twin Blade. While doing that, I picked up some other goodies. Notable ones were the Bracing Knuckle Ring and the Golden Wing Shield to replace my Blossom Kite Shield. After getting a little over 20 dex, I decided it was time to challenge the Lost Sinner. The Twin Blade performed surprisingly well under these circumstances, even if I didn't have the stats to properly wield it. After that NG Plus run, the Lost Sinner can't phase me without her Pyromancers, so this was actually a pretty easy fight, even if I had to squint really hard to see her. Of course, being one of the old ones, she'll give me a decent amount of levels, which I put towards more vigor and endurance. We've done jump attacks, backstep attacks, but what about roll attacks? For this one, I chose the Craftsman's Hammer since it's just a good weapon in general. The rolling attack is very linear, but capable of some good damage, along with its staggering ability. I didn't have any problems mowing down the inhabitants of Huntsman's Copse with this thing. This time, we're gonna head to the Executioner's Chariot first, because it has something we're gonna need to complete this area. Miraculously, I survived this altercation with the skeletons, and managed to escape them by quickly rolling to the other side and narrowly avoiding the chariot. Once the skeletons were out of the way, the chariot itself didn't present much of an issue. I had struggled a bit to kill the final necromancer and ran out of Estus, but the Craftsman's Hammer finished the job before I had time to run out of healing items. Now, we're gonna get a little more stamina before going back out to finish the area and complete our next objective. This one is right to the point. I must beat the Skeleton Lords with the shield crossbow, which can be made from the Chariot's soul. I was using the cheapest and therefore weakest bolts for this, but even then, the damage wasn't that bad, especially when they weren't blocking. Speaking of blocking, this isn't called the shield crossbow for nothing. One thing it can do that no other crossbow can is block for you while you're shooting. So as long as you have enough stamina, you can block through attacks and keep shooting. Though in my case, I preferred the conventional ranged method for this fight, as the skeletons can quickly break my guard when they swarm around me. Eventually, it was just me and this final skeleton, and like I did many times in this fight, I waited until it was finished blocking, then took the shot for the maximum damage, and that was that. Now, let's move on to the next objective. Though I swore to bury this thing far into the depths of the earth, where I'd never have to see its disgusting form again after that NG Plus items run, I had to dig it up one more time for the sake of this challenge. Since the request was to simply use the butterfly shield, I was free to choose the area I could bring it to. Being a shield that relies solely on its poison buildup, I found it the most logical to take it to the poison swamp area, where most enemies are likely resistant to poison. It was probably the shield's fault, but for whatever reason, the enemies were bending over backwards to neutralize me. Bonkers McHonkers over here was doing flips off of ledges to get to me, and I kept trying to move out of her range, but she just wouldn't stop pursuing. I mean, seriously, this guy too? He is strategically blocking my path to the ladder. After making it past that oddly coordinated mob at the entrance, the rest of the path to the boss was fairly peaceful. Surprisingly, the Covetous Demon is not immune to poison, just highly resistant. As you can see, despite the high poison buildup from the butterfly shield, it took somewhere around 30 hits to poison him. I assumed that would be my only chance to poison him for the rest of the fight, but I managed to poison him at the very end and save myself maybe 10 seconds of shield bashing. As for the next objective, see that windmill over there? We're supposed to burn it, right? Nope, not this time. because one of you guys pointed out the optional challenges Dark Souls 2 builds in for the players, this being one of many in the list. I'm sure you know this, but for those less familiar with DS2, burning the windmill stops the flow of poison in several areas, one of them being Mytha's boss room, and chances are many of us have missed this in our first playthrough and tried to fight her in the poison without even knowing about the intended alternative. But this time, I'm going to be doing it on purpose. While we're here, there's actually another objective I'd like to try for this area. Basically, I'm going to be looting 2 weapons of the same weapon class so I can power stance them to kill the boss. The weapon class I chose is spears, because the pike is the first weapon I looted in the area, and the Grave Wardens happened to drop another spear to use with it. After several unsuccessful attempts to get their weapon, I came up with a really good method using the poison pool in front of the fog gate. The Grave Wardens are not immune to poison, so all it takes is luring them into the poison pool and waiting for the poison to do its work. It wasn't long until I finally got my hands on the silver-black spear. Of course, I can't wield it without getting more intelligence and faith, but that won't be much of a problem when I have soul vessels at my disposal. Since I was heading out that way anyways, I decided to take care of the ogre infestation and get the handmaid's ladle for later. After upgrading my spears to a decent level, I used the soul vessel to get the stats I needed, then went to challenge Mytha. Technically, I'm not actually power stancing them, but dual wielding again. I would need more stat investment into Dex to do that, so I figured dual wielding would be okay in this case. From her poison, Mytha gradually regenerates bits of her health. So having high DPS is very important in order to offset the health she gets back. This means that we can't stay idle in this fight for too long. We have to be pretty aggressive, but not too aggressive, because in that case, we would probably just die from the poison buildup. There's nothing to worry about if you can put out big damage quickly, and our spears can in this case. We even get some counter hits to help us out even more. Fighting her this way wasn't as difficult as expected, and weirdly, I beat her faster than I have fighting her normally on some runs. The next objective is one I've been putting off a bit, mainly because it will take a lot of repair powder. So now that I've gathered a decent amount, I think it's worth a shot. All I need is to get Iron Flesh and the Old Sun Ring, and I'm ready to face the Ruined Sentinels. The point of Iron Flesh here is to help us heal through hits, and if we take many hits in rapid succession, the ring has more chances to explode. However, I vastly underestimated just how much repair powder this would take, and only made it through one Sentinel's health bar before running out. Sadly, the ring does not explode anymore once broken, so we'll have to come back to this one later. Since the way is already open, we might as well head towards the Doors of Pharos area. I'm gonna build upon this idea, but instead of using equipment from one enemy, I'm instead going to get one piece equipment from each enemy in the area. This means I'll have to spend a little time farming, but hopefully not too much time. Thankfully, the enemies here seem to have good drop rates for their items. I ended up using a Mastodon halberd from the Primal Knights, a helmet from the Gerim Worker, and armor from the Gerim Warrior. Since there's one merchant here, I decided to count him too, just for fun, and use the Ring of Giants I bought from him. To add an extra challenge to this fight, I fought it with all the toxic rats still alive. This took a few times of just running in and dying to the toxic instantly, but if you can manage to circle around them, the friendly fire from the Authority should keep them in check. Since I couldn't kill any of them, locking on was out of the question, and if they got caught in the crossfire between me and the boss, that was on them. Because of that, there was only one rat still clinging on to life at the end of the fight, and it gave me one last toxic kiss goodbye before I finished the fight. The next objective requires me to join the Blue Sentinels, so I can buy some holy water urns. Now, all I have to do is throw them at the congregation. They are hollows after all, so it will work well against them. Magus himself, however, is not susceptible to urns. You can see here, he kinda just powers through it. I didn't actually plan what I was gonna use to kill him, so I got a little spontaneous and looked at whatever consumables I had in my inventory. These 13 poison knives I had lying around did the trick. Even the physical damage from the knives takes out a generous portion of his HP, so clearly, he stands no chance. As we head deeper into Brightstone Cove, we're gonna follow the same equipment rules from the Doors of Pharos, as in one piece of equipment from each enemy, but for Freya, we're gonna have to follow another rule during the fight. We're gonna fight her without looking, or really, our character can't look at her. We must hit her while not actually facing her, and to do that, we need a weapon capable of covering multiple directions. After some farming, I finally got the weapon I had in mind, the Zweihanda. Its one-handed heavy attack has a follow-up where the character turns the blade behind them, which is a perfect way to hit a boss without looking directly at it. I've upgraded it to +8 because the nature of this challenge demands that I take a lot of damage. So to compensate, I need to be doing a lot of damage myself. Oh, and don't forget about the other objective, the built-in optional challenge of coming in without a torch. So not only am I dealing with not being able to see what follow-up she's doing, I also have a group of spiders constantly swarming around my feet. Despite all that, this challenge was another one that was much easier than I anticipated. Most of the time when I was in front of her with my back turned, I had a weird view of the inside of her model that showed me if I was aligned with her head, so I managed to start hitting her more consistently. In case you were wondering, this is what my stats look like at this point. It's probably a good time to head down into the pit and see what objectives we have to clear there. The first one I'll be doing is this simple request. All I have to do is clear every enemy in any given area with only the spells I can carry. So, no herbs allowed. This is the shortest area in the game, and since the spells I can use are limited right now, I'm gonna see if I can make them work down here. With the Desert Sorceress Hood, I can cast Great Soul Arrow, and the only other thing I have room for is a Pyromancy. The Pyromancy at least one-shots the rats, but chances are I won't have any casts left by the time I reach the boss. I was gonna just go to the boss anyway, but Roy had other plans for my day. After I got back to where I left off, I realized I accidentally removed one of my extra slots when I took off my rings to jump down here. So I could still have some fireballs left for the boss fight after all. However, by the time the Vanguard showed up, I had used them all up and had to resort to catalyst whacking again. I'm gonna need this pretty soon, so I might as well get it right now. As we descend into the dark depths of the gutter, we are confronted with our next objective. That's right, we'll be rejecting the one piece of guidance we have and turning off the HUD, meaning there's no longer a way to tell where our health or poison meter stands. On top of this, I'm not going to take a torch, because I think being lost in the darkness without a guiding light fits thematically with our objective. However, I'm not completely without guidance. No matter how hollowed I may be from this journey, my memory of the gutter from journeys past serves as a beacon to light the way. When I arrived to the Black Gulch, I knew I would have to be patient and destroy the statues, since I can't see the health I lose from poison. I can still see it on my character when I get poisoned, so it's best to cure it the moment I see it, rather than wait and risk misjudging my health. Breaking through all those statues is not without its consequences. By the time I made it to the end, my Zweihanda finally broke, You can see it happen while I'm taking out this hollow. Of course, I was unaware of this at the time and was really confused about why my +8 Zweihander wasn't killing this guy in one hit. Once I noticed, I went to repair it, then wasted no time in using it to pummel the Rotten. Without a health bar, I have to guess as to what my progress is in the fight. And since I can't tell how much damage I'm taking, I didn't take any risks and just stayed in front of it and took one swing at a time. I repeated this strategy until the fight was done, which wasn't a long stretch of time at all. Once again, with all the souls I got from defeating an old one, I started leveling the magic stats that I'd been neglecting. When you go through Iron Keep, what's the first thing you try to remind yourself of? Usually, something along the lines of being patient and clearing out the enemies before just rushing into a death trap, right? Yeah, that's what I try to remember with areas like this too. So when I saw that someone challenged me to go through a whole area without killing any enemies, I knew exactly what I had to do. With no weapons, and certainly no wits, the only thing one can do is run. I'm honestly impressed that I even got that far. My fatal error was letting a group of enemies follow me into the dead end room. Since you don't get invincibility frames during the lever animation, you just get interrupted. And when you try to turn back, it's already too late. To make it past that predicament, we'll have to use the options given to us by the game. This is legal according to the rules. I'm not killing anything. They step into the flames of their own volition. I actually gained a little extra appreciation for the level design here in this moment. I realized these statues aren't as much an obstacle for the player as they are a way to help thin out the droves of knights chasing behind you. Thankfully, I can nudge this turtle guy into the flames by rolling, and finally make it to the finish line. The next objective will be a nice way to wind down after that sprint through hell. All I need to do is kill the old Iron King using only damage over time. In this case, I have Poison and Toxic Mist to work with. It only takes 2 casts of each to trigger, and with a reliable stock of herbs, this fight is nothing more than a waiting game. That'll be enough for a significant amount of levels towards Int and Faith. From this point forward, the objectives are going to be ramping up in difficulty. We're going to be revisiting this objective, but this time we'll be fulfilling the first part of it, which is to become a Primal Knight, aka an elephant. I've also joined the Covenant of Champions to collect Awe Stones while I farm for the set. You'll see why soon. Once we have become an elephant, we have proven ourselves worthy of stepping foot into Drangleic Castle. Even though the enemies within hit harder while I'm in the Champion Covenant, none of them stood any chance against the Mastodon Halberd. You may have noticed that the challenge also included being overloaded as a factor. I didn't want to spend 4 hours walking through the area, so I only applied this part to the boss fight. If I'm gonna be overloaded anyway, I might as well cast Iron Flesh so I can tank through more hits. I didn't know it yet, but this was a contender for the most difficult challenge of the whole run. The clips don't really do it justice, but this was pure torture that I was stuck on for days. This is one of those things that doesn't seem that hard until you try it. I really thought that I would just plow through these guys in a classic Havel tank fashion, but that wasn't even close to how the fight went down. I did everything in my power to make this easier on me. I upgraded my armor as much as I could, and spent time farming for the strength to properly wield my great shield, but none of it seemed to help, and the whole rhythm of the fight continued to be ruined by the archer. If the archer weren't a factor in this fight, things would have gone better, since I more or less figured out when to block and when it was safe to attack. But stamina management is difficult enough as it is when it recovers at a snail's pace, so an arrow was all it took to break my guard and allow the melee guy to combo me to death. I felt like I was stuck in this fight, with no hope of progressing. So I did a little test. I left the Covenant of Champions to see just how much of a difference it made in this fight. I was flabbergasted when I saw the difference. It felt like my whole life was a lie, and that I had somehow been gaslit. The difference in damage from both parties was like night and day, and I actually felt guilty after beating them this way. It felt like I had cheated. But if I need something to absolve myself of that guilt, the next objective has me covered. In what is without question the most punishing, difficult, random, and frustrating challenge of the whole playthrough, I will be fighting the Looking Glass Knight with only ring damage. This was the first time in a while where I reached Gravelord Miracle Run levels of frustration. It's probably not a coincidence that both of these challenges are based on RNG. In this case, what I have to work with does far less damage than Gravelord Miracles, and has the potential to break very quickly if I don't use Repair Powder in time. The rings we have are the Old Sun Ring and the Ring of Thorns. The Ring of Thorns has a 30% chance to activate after I take damage, but it fires off in a weird shape that does inconsistent amounts of damage. As for the Old Sun Ring, we saw it in action against the Ruined Sentinels already. It has a higher chance of activating the more durability it has, so I tried to sustain 50 to 75% durability throughout the fight. I'm still in elephant form, so I used my Great Shield to my advantage and blocked attacks that I didn't want to get hit by. While blocking can't activate the rings, I've seen claims that it stores the damage for the next time you get hit, so it might count for whatever the damage threshold is that the Old Sun Ring needs to activate. I couldn't tell either way, so don't take this as a confirmation of that. I cut it close so many times on the winning attempt, and the fight as a whole took almost 40 minutes. Right before I got the final hit, I was so nervous, and my hands were too shaky to even equip the covetous ring in time. Before treading into late game territory, the fight with Looking Glass Knight reminded me that I had a little cleanup to do back at the Lost Bastille. The Ruined Sentinels felt like a breeze after what I went through in Drangleic Castle. It's probably because they attack much faster, but the Old Sun Ring seemed much more trigger-happy against them in comparison to the Looking Glass Knight. I mean, take this moment for example. It exploded twice from one hit. Why couldn't I have that kind of luck earlier? Moving on to the Belfry Luna, I take out the Craftsman's Hammer one more time, after some modest upgrades. I didn't want to feel too overpowered since I'm fighting the gargoyles so late, but apparently that wouldn't be a problem with my poor parrying skills. Since the objective here is to only hit them after parrying, this should be a good chance for some parry training. I chose the parrying dagger because it's light and is quick enough to parry the gargoyles one after another. Assuming they don't jump back after being staggered, I have time for at least 2 hits before waiting for my next parry opportunity. Did you just use your friend as a sacrifice to avoid the hit from the parry? That's cold-hearted. We may have been enemies, but it's only fair that I grant justice after witnessing that cruel display. In case I needed to face any more justice for the Dragon Rider situation, I rejoined the Covenant of Champions in order to complete the next objective. With my 50 Awstones, I can get the Vanquisher's Seal, which will greatly increase damage done with bare fists. Naturally, that would make a challenge, like going through the Shrine of Amana with fists only, much easier, so to compensate for this, there will be a few other restrictions. First, I must stay in the Covenant of Champions until I beat the area boss, which, as we saw earlier, makes a significant difference in the amount of damage I receive from enemies. Second, I am taking fists only as literally as I can. In other words, no armor, no other rings, and no Estus. However, in order to incentivize myself to engage with enemies rather than trying to rush through them, I am making one exception to equip the Ring of the Evil Eye, which means defeating enemies is the only way I can heal. Unsurprisingly, this area took several hours to clear. It was mainly the second part, starting at the shack right before the last bonfire, where I had problems. Luring the Archdrakes into 1v1 fights became exceedingly difficult, with a caster constantly firing at me from behind. And now that a healer was in the equation, it wasn't viable to fight them together either. However, after many attempts at making it to the Fog Gate, I was able to lure one out of the aggro range of the Priestess and finally start preparing for the Demon of Song. As my reward for braving it out with my fists, I get to fight with a chime. I actually had a few requests to specifically use the disc chime as a melee weapon. I wasn't sure how it would fare here, so I upgraded it to +8 to be on the safe side. Before going into the fight, I top off my health and hope for the best. Yeah, I should have expected that outcome. Is it just me, or is the disc chime actually kinda good? This is doing more damage against it than some of the regular melee weapons I've tried. What gives? I guess I didn't really think about it, but it does both lightning and dark damage, and the lightning gets a small boost from the water in the arena, so that adds up to some decent damage. Next, we're going to respec to get the minimum stats required to cast hexes. Specifically, hexes that cost souls, such as Resonant and Great Resonant Soul. We'll come back to this soon, but for now, let's focus on the current objective, which is to go through an area with the minimum brightness. I didn't think this would be too hard, but I wasn't taking into account the fact that my monitor already darkens certain games in full screen. This means it was much darker for me than it appears on the video. To make it past the jagged twists and turns, I must rely on the dim light emitted by my character, taking baby steps forward to illuminate the ground right in front of me. Sometimes I made some missteps, sometimes I got backstabbed by Havel, but the good thing is that the enemies also have to watch their step, lest they plunge to their doom in total darkness. After lighting up each chasm, I wasn't quite ready for Dark Lurker, so while I keep preparing for that, let's go somewhere else in the meantime. We're gonna take a quick trip to Broom Tower to pick up the Majestic Greatsword for our next objective. I don't think there's a better weapon to choose if you're only using a left-hand moveset. The Majestic Greatsword has a unique moveset in the left hand, as well as better scaling. I am gonna have to respec one more time though. The dex requirement is pretty high, so to reach it, we're gonna have to get Kale's Helm in a totally friendly manner. Then if we combine that with the Dexterity Ring and the Work Hook, we'll only need one more level into Dex to wield it. Naturally, we'll use it to clear the Undead Crypt, since it's time to go there anyway. I decided not to upgrade it to add a bit of an extra challenge, but even then, It was killing these late game enemies in just a couple hits. Combine that with its ability to stun lock low poise enemies and NPCs, and you've got a solid weapon right out of the box. Even Velstadt himself should be no match for the Majestic Greatsword. This was the first time in a while that I fought him without a giant slow weapon, so it was refreshing to have enough stamina left to dodge his attacks. I also got some good damage on him during his buff by channeling the soul of Artorias with the sword spin attack. Despite his increased defenses, he still was no match for our sword, and was quickly defeated. With him taken care of, we can buy his full set back in Majula. You'll know the reason for this soon enough. We'll also go to Ornifex to trade for the Sacred Chime Hammer before going back to the crypt for one last errand. If you recall this list of challenges, you'll see that one of them is to defeat Vendrick without Giant Souls. I've actually never done this before, so I didn't really know what to expect when I started whacking away at him. The fact that it took somewhere around 10 minutes just to get his health bar to show up should have been a giant red flag telling me that my current setup wasn't going to work. But nevertheless, I decided to push on and see if I could make any progress. Okay, well, I pushed on for about another minute, then backed out. While the main boss of the crypt was defeated, and I technically wasn't bound to the left-hand moveset rule anymore, I had grown attached to my Majestic Greatsword, and tried everything I could to make it work against Vendrick. I fully upgraded it, and infused it with bleed, hoping to see some sort of improvement. Don't get me wrong, the 200 damage from the bleed is the only thing that makes this fight doable for someone that doesn't plan to stay here for hours, so there was a clear improvement. However, I found myself getting caught by him too many times, and grew impatient with the slow onset of bleed from the Greatsword. Since physical damage wasn't even relevant in this fight, I switched to the Bandit's Knife, since its fast moveset allows me to trigger bleed faster, plus it consumes less stamina and leaves me more time to reposition myself at his left leg. In the top left, you can see that I joined the Brotherhood of Blood to get the Crest of Blood, which will speed up bleed buildup. On top of that, I farmed for the Shadow Gauntlets, which stack with the ring, to speed it up even more. Sadly, all we can do is speed it up. There's no way to increase the amount of damage that bleed does. We just have to be grateful that he's susceptible to bleed at all. That reduced a potential 3-hour-long fight to just over 20 minutes. That's not too bad at all. All I have to say about this is that I am never doing it again. After this, we'll have enough souls to get several levels into attunement, and if we go to pick up his soul, we'll have enough to get another attunement slot. That's enough for several casts of our soul hexes, which brings us to the next challenge. We're gonna be fighting the Dark Lurker in a minimalist way, with an unupgraded chime and no rings to boost our damage. The only part I didn't really do was the minimum amount of souls for the cast, since I had to kill all the enemies before coming in each time I died. Considering that the chime was unupgraded and Dark Lurker has 70% resistance to dark damage, I was surprised to even be doing over 100 damage per cast. This still took a decent level of patience to do, but after Vendrick, this fight went by much faster. Before we move on to the last areas of the game, we're gonna revisit Iron Keep for a quick cooldown challenge. I got an interesting request to use every element against a boss. Of course, that includes every type of magic, but also poison and toxic. I'm also going to count every type of physical damage. I applied each type of damage one after another to see if I could beat Smelter Demon by using each element or damage type only once. And it probably would have worked with just slightly more damage, but since it didn't, I finished him off normally. In Aldia's Keep, our objective is not just to use a catalyst for melee, but also to acquire a particular catalyst we can find as loot in the area. While I made my way towards that staff, I was using the Disc Chime to finish off anything in my way. The Disc Chime is still pretty good, even in Aldia's keep, and the only things that could really hold their own against it were the forlorn invaders. Now all that's left to do is release the creatures from their cages, and slay the mimic that's holding our staff of choice. The Black Witch's Staff. As far as catalysts go, this thing isn't half bad as a bonking stick. It has a base of 110 damage in each element, with notably decent scaling on dark and magic damage. If you were to fully upgrade it, I dare say it would work as a dedicated melee weapon. After going through the motions of whacking the Guardian Dragon with my magical stick, I had enough levels for another attunement slot. With the Ashen Mist Heart now in our possession, the next objective should be clear. I had several requests to use the ladle against something, and one of these stood out to me. It was this one to use an unupgraded broken ladle infused with bleed. Unfortunately, the ladle is classified as a hammer, so we won't be able to infuse it with bleed. The bad thing about this is that unlike most weapons, the ladle actually does 0 damage when broken. And even infusing it with another element will not offer a bonus in damage. The only way to do damage in its broken state is to enchant it, but the damage bonus is greatly reduced. However, I was not ready to give up just yet. I had to at least try. So, to the person who requested I beat the last giant with the ladle, don't worry, I have something even better. I put a lot of thought into which boss I wanted to fight with a ladle, and ultimately picked the Giant Lord because I liked the idea of a race against the clock with nothing but a ladle. I wanted to prove that the ladle could beat him fast enough, but clearly this was mathematically impossible, at least when it's broken. Immediately after I managed to poison him, I got the Ashen Mist has thinned notification, which would be the moment the music speeds up if this were a platformer. Even though he stomped me into the pavement before the game could kick me out, you can see that the screen was starting to fade out anyway. Since it wasn't possible with a broken ladle, I settled for just an unupgraded ladle. This took some trial and error, and I found that the best way to manage my time in this fight is to poison him first, then start using bleed, then go back to poison once the first one stops, and so on. Sometimes I got greedy and tried for a second burst of bleed. That's probably why I beat him with only 10 seconds left on the clock. It's finally time to do some challenges in the DLC areas. We're gonna start it off with a little bit of cosplay shenanigans in Broom Tower. I liked the idea of beating a boss with their own gear, but since I'm not in NG Plus this time, this suggestion of using Smelter Demon gear for the blue Smelter Demon seemed fitting. I enjoy this kind of theme for playthroughs, so this was a fun one to do. Oddly, I've never really used the Smelter Sword for anything, and I don't know why, because it's a really cool sword. Well, technically it's a hot sword that audibly combusts on hit and releases a giant flame with its special attack. I didn't get much use out of the special attack because regular attacks worked just fine. There's not too much to say about this fight, but the next one will be where the real epic showdown starts. Recall a few bosses back where I hinted that I'd be using Velstot's gear for something in particular. Well, we finally reached that thing I was talking about. I had several requests to use weapon arts only, and one of those challenged me to beat the Fume Knight with only the Sacred Chime Hammer's special attack. I decided to take it up a notch and go all out with full Velstot gear. There's an interesting secret to this fight, related to the rivalry between Velstot and Raim. Wearing Velstot's helmet will immediately trigger Phase 2, which is an extra challenge in itself. But that's not all. We're gonna be doing this without destroying any Ashen Idols, because I know you guys wanted to see some suffering. And who am I to resist the will of the people? I plan on uploading the full fight for those that want to see it, so keep an eye out for that if that's something you'd want to see. It's pretty monotonous, but at the same time, just re-watching it makes my stomach drop, remembering all the times I made a mistake that almost ruined the fight. This fight was up there with the Looking Glass Knight and Dragon Riders in difficulty. It took several days to complete this, and what I said about the Dragon Riders applies to this one, which is that the video doesn't do it justice. First of all, there's the issue of the attack itself. It barely does any damage, and the amount of orbs that connect with him seemed random. With all the Ashen Idols still here, most of the arena becomes unusable because it's in the range of their healing. Due to this, my only option was to hug the wall where he spawns in. This is really the only place that there's any room to fight him without getting near the healers, but it still is a very small space. Running away from him to heal is not an option, nor is spacing him out during certain attacks. I have to work with the small portion of the arena that I have and adapt to close range as best as I can. Despite this, there is a chance that he will backstep right into the healing bubble of the Ashen Idols and undo 15 minutes of progress in a single second. I'm a sore loser, so every time that happened, I quit out to save my repair powder. In the end, this fight took almost 30 minutes, which isn't bad compared to some other fights in this run, but every minute of it was filled with anxiety and despair. So I'd say it was pretty fun. And you can't get that sense of pride after a victory without a worthy struggle to earn it. But after that, it's clear that I need a break. So we're gonna go to the Sanctum City and take on Alana with some melee spells. I've done Catalyst melee already, so it only seems fair that melee type spells get their chance to shine. What I have to work with is mostly Pyromancy, but I do have one sorcery to cover magic damage, that one being Soul Greatsword. I was able to shave off a lot of her HP with Great Combustion, but she stopped me in my tracks by summoning a Velstadt. Next, I gave Fire Whip a try, and it was also effective, but my luck as always is for her to summon another Velstadt first. This forced me into a tight spot, but I managed to make it out alive, and luckily, she only summoned skeletons from here on out. Dance of Fire isn't bad, and is capable of catching multiple targets on the few occasions that it hits anything. I suppose I could have tried it with my left hand, but I didn't see a need to, when I could simply switch back to Great Combustion. After that fight, I needed to fully commit to a faith build, so I respect to as much faith as I could. For this challenge, we're gonna play the part of the healer and bring in 2 friends to do all the fighting. It's only fair that I bring my own gank squad and make this a slightly more even fight. So with the help of Rapacious Andre and Ruined Aphlis, I form my own tag team. I can't say I was expecting much of them, but it was actually me who died first trying to heal them. I was already getting whittled down by the sniper in the distance, a fact that was not lost on Havel. As I tried to heal once more, he abandoned his battle with Aphlis and opportunistically targeted me instead. However, I realized that, when kept in check, it was better if the hardest hitter in the group primarily focuses on me. So I bought the Red Eye Ring to become the main target, something that I should have done in the first place. My plan of luring away the Havel Warrior was a success, and with the sniper's attention divided between me and the NPCs, the Grave Robber was practically stuck in a 2v1. After regrouping with the others to quickly heal them, I had to get the warrior's attention again so they could safely finish off the Grave Robber. At this point, everything was going as planned, and I could make sure he kept chasing me while the other 2 ganged up on the archer. An easy way to do this was to stand behind the rocks and mesmerize him by gazing into his eyes for a few minutes. If he broke free of my hypnosis, I would bring him back over before he could help his friend. Then, it would just be us 2, locking gazes again, as I snuck glances at the fight in the distance. Eventually, he finally figured out what was going on, but by then, it was already too late. He was no match against the power of friendship. And though my team is weak, nothing is impossible with a good strategist by your side. Okay, I've had my break. Now it's time for the scary challenges to start back up again. This one is particularly devious. On its own, defeating Ava without the Eye of the Priestess certainly won't be easy, but I am going to be doing it using Power Stance whips. This is so devious because not only do whips break easily, but Ava herself does extra damage to equipment, so I have to constantly be mindful of their durability, or I could break them just by performing a combo. To start with, I chose one standard old whip and one fire-infused old whip. Though they can break in a matter of seconds, their damage is very high among whips. My early attempts consisted of me cluelessly flailing around and getting caught by grabs and pounces. But that didn't bother me. After all, at this point I was still learning. She becomes slightly visible for a short time every 20 to 30 seconds, and while it's helpful, it isn't something you should rely on completely. As I got more and more used to her patterns, I noticed something that I never really thought about before. While this is present to a smaller extent on other boss fights, her audio cues are very loud and telling for her attack timing. There are other bosses in the series, such as Sister Frieda, that use such audio cues, and once that hit me, I realized that the reason for both bosses was the same. Frieda mainly uses audio cues, of course, while she's invisible, because the game anticipates that players may not follow her movement and will need another way to dodge her impending attack. I noticed that the same was true for Ava, except this occurs before all of her attacks. But it's not something you'll think about as much when she's visible, so it may go unnoticed. I know I'm going on a tangent about something that's probably really obvious, but it ended up being important for me. So why was it so important? Well, I had been trying this fight for a while with no breakthroughs until I realized this. This realization led me to figure out another important thing about this fight, and it's that the developers anticipated that many people would want to fight her this way. It's not technically how you're supposed to fight it, but they knew that there would be some players up to the challenge. So it's not a coincidence that she has an obvious audio cue before every single one of her attacks. My point is, this realization was so important because, as cheesy as it sounds, it reminded me that this fight was not impossible. I simply would have to adapt to using sound rather than sight to fight her. The developers did not add this gimmick just for the sake of making it unfair. In fact, all of what I just mentioned shows that they put in just enough to make it doable, even if you're not that good of a player. All that being said, this whole fight was some BS, and I'm making Ava into leather to repair my whips. There's no shortage of devious challenges just yet. We've still got the Frigid Outskirts on the list. You know it's gonna be good when a request is prefaced with, "Okay, this is gonna be a bit evil." I'm no coward, so after seeing what I had to do, I did exactly what was asked of me and went to the menu to invert my camera controls. This reminds me of the PS2 days, and not the good ones. At least I don't have to worry as much when I lock on, but it's very jarring every time I have to readjust my character. I wanted to make my life a little easier, so I brought along a drumstick and the stone ring to pancake the reindeer horse monsters to death, which made the run to the boss fight much shorter. For the fight itself, I switched to the Iron King's hammer for some fire damage and relentlessly swung away. I was sort of following along with another objective, which was to fight it with a heavy load, but I also was supposed to do it without dodging, and to be completely honest with you, the only reason I dodged was because I genuinely forgot about that part. I read over each objective again before I went through with it, but my brain had eroded so much by this point that it just slipped my mind. That aside, I was relieved to see how much damage I was doing against the king's pets, which gave me the motivation I needed to keep running through the outskirts to challenge them again. I tried to avoid using the camera whenever possible since it only confused me more, but I did acquiesce to it with time. Perhaps a little too much, I'd say. I was worried this would happen. I changed the controls back, and what do you know? Now I'm used to the inverted ones and have to repeat the same adjustment process with the standard ones. The last thing before we're done with the channel's namesake is the Ivory King himself. we actually have an objective to complete for this fight specifically, which is to fight it with only great shields. I wanted to try something unique and different, so I farmed for a long time to get the only great shields in the game that can be power stanced, Orma's great shield and Reeve's great shield. They were okay, nothing too special, but as is typical of great shields, the shield bash is pretty good at staggering enemies, but I couldn't make much use of it since it consumed so much stamina. The Burnt Ivory King was easier than the Knights. He's just one guy, so I can stagger him and leave my guard down for a second to let my stamina recover. This fight was quick in comparison to the others in Aleum Lois. There wasn't much to say about it. At the level I'm at, 100k souls doesn't go too far, but it's not like I need it much anyway. I've been putting it off long enough. It's time for me to complete the second DLC. This fight was a short one, so I'll talk you through everything as the footage rolls. As is so bluntly stated in this comment, the next objective comes straight from the mind of a massive sadist. The challenge is to beat Sur Alon without getting hit while in a constant state of toxic. On top of this, I had to fulfill another objective, which was fighting Sur Alon without rolling. Before you point it out, there's a reason I am using the symbol of avarice and not dung pies. I tried this with dung pies a few times, but it took at least 5 dung pies to reapply the meter each time, and since it only lasts 20 seconds, I just couldn't keep up with having to throw 5 more each time, and I went through them so quickly that I had to constantly leave and buy more. It was a good idea, there's no doubt about that, and I'm sure it's possible, but I guess I chickened out. But like I said, I liked this idea of fighting him while constantly losing health, so I used the best alternative I could think of. I wanted the same amount of risk that the toxin would have presented. So I compromised by getting myself into RTSR range of health, or slightly higher, to give myself somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes to finish the fight. This way, I had the same experience of fighting him under pressure, but could focus on reacting to his moves without as many factors to worry about at the same time. I had to guess how much health I had, since DS2 doesn't show your current HP for some reason, and there were many times where I took too long and just died from the health loss. In the end, this fight took about 70 seconds, with maybe 10 more seconds left before I dropped dead. Apparently, damage taken from any source determines whether or not you get the seppuku animation, so unfortunately, I didn't get that special animation, so I was slightly disappointed, but this was a great fight regardless, and I can say with confidence that this challenge was the most fun part of the whole playthrough. Sur Alon was guarding the final Smelter Wedge, which was the last thing I needed to obtain the complete soul of Nidalia. With her soul, we're gonna make the Chime of Screams, so if you were wondering why I skipped Sin, don't worry, I didn't forget about him, I was just saving him for later. We'll have to respec again, then infuse it with lightning for a boost to our miracles, and finally, put everything we have into upgrading it. I thought you guys were exaggerating, but you weren't kidding when you told me to make a cup of tea. Casting time on this thing is so damn slow. I've never used this chime solely because there are always better options available, so watching it cast is completely novel for me. I also didn't equip anything to increase the casting speed, because I figured that would be cheating if the whole purpose of using it is for its long casts. The only thing I'm doing differently is using miracles in place of hexes. This was just a personal adjustment I made, since I wanted to use miracles before the run ended. At least it is kind of funny to watch my character space out while staring at a lightning bolt. They don't seem too confident about this chime either. Following a few deaths, I did take the time to farm for more petrified dragon bones off camera, because in this situation, casting just one spell takes a lot of commitment. I gotta make it count. Heavenly Thunder was really helpful against Sin, since he's such a big enemy, and the only other miracle that was any good here was the standard Great Lightning Spear. To deal with him, I simply learned what my openings were, and worked with them to slowly but surely achieve victory. There's one more dragon prowling among the territories of Drangleic, but rather than hoping for a miracle, we're gonna have to drum up all the raw strength we can muster. After getting my strength back to 99, which is the exact amount we need, we can power stance the illustrious chicken drumsticks. I had multiple requests asking for this, and I wasn't about to let all those be for nothing. Someone even specifically requested that I do this for the Ancient Dragon, but this time I combined 3 objectives into one to create the ultimate painful Ancient Dragon experience. So we've got the drumsticks, but we're also overloaded, and we're also doing an all-hit. That last one's probably a given in this state. I couldn't avoid his attacks even if I wanted to. What I can do, as suggested, is max out my fire resistance to mitigate the fire breath, but I'm on my own when it comes to the stomps. The most I could do was make sure I had enough health to survive every attack, which is why when I reallocated my stats, I gave myself some extra vigor. After 5 minutes of walking towards him like an unstoppable force, I got lucky enough to be pushed under him by the fire rather than away from him. Now that I'm here, all I have to do is repeat the simple ritual of hitting those toes, getting hit by the fire breath, getting my face stomped in, then hitting the toes again. A few minutes of that is all it took to stick it to him. As we start the final marathon of bosses, you'll notice that my hotbar is full of a lot of useless junk, and there's a reason for that. Our objective here is simply to beat the Throne duo with consumables only, but why not raise the difficulty a little? In the original community post, where I asked for your suggestions, I gave an example objective as inspiration. This objective was to beat a boss with only consumables with no HUD so that I can't tell what I have equipped. Since I'm fighting these two with consumables anyway, I figured this would be a perfect place to apply that idea. So every time I was about to enter the fight, I would spam down on the D-pad to shuffle my starting item, then go in and hope it didn't land on a healing item. If I weren't paying attention, I would be very lost if I wanted to use a specific consumable. But the trick is to remember where each item is relative to the others. That way, you can estimate where your desired consumables are. So, for example, if I knew I needed to heal, I would throw something at the bosses to check my position, then I'd know how many items I had to go through to reach my Estus or life gems. Everything in this fight comes down to estimation, and if you focus on what you're doing, and keep track of what you've already done, it will be much easier. What I mean by this is, you don't have to count every hit, but you need a good idea of how many times you've hit the Watcher and the Defender, because their health needs to be about the same to minimize the chances of the other getting revived. Thankfully, this is easy to determine, because you'll know that if one buffs and the other doesn't, you need to focus on hitting the one who hasn't buffed their weapon yet. Once I finally managed to bring one down, I became really aggressive and started chucking urns at the other one without even focusing on my health. Somehow this worked, and she ended up having much less health left than I thought. Moving on to Nashandra, our goal is simple. We're going to dropkick her until she begs for our mercy and taps out. We can achieve this by using the Bone Fist exclusively for its one-handed running attack. There's no need to upgrade it. She doesn't have any increased physical resistances. On the contrary, she's slightly weak to the strike damage of our Bone Fist, or foot. Having the King's Blessing gives us a small advantage since it nullifies her curse, but it's wasted on me, as proven in those last few clips. With some well-timed rolls, we can counter her combo with a final kick to shatter her femur and reclaim our royal title. But there is one last challenger in the way of the throne. And sadly, the rules have changed, and martial arts are no longer legal in this fight. Instead, all we can do is mimic Aldia by coating ourselves in flame and then see who was left standing. I had a brain fart before this and prematurely cast Immolation before he had even started his monologue, which was a sign of just how unprepared I was to undergo this challenge. This might as well have been a test run. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but however tedious and draining I expected it to be, it was much worse. To start, I wasn't even using a shield, which is a necessity in this kind of challenge. The first shield I tried was the Get 'em Great Shield, which seemed logical. After all, Aldia is a burning creature, so 100% fire and physical negation seemed too good to be true. Well, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. It turns out, Aldia's fire is split between dark and fire damage, so I was still taking a lot of damage from the dark portion. In the end, Havel's Great Shield was the best option. It has high fire and dark negation, which made a huge difference when blocking his spells. Like every fight, I learned that I had to be patient enough to wait for very specific attacks before blindly charging in. There are only 2 attacks where he cools off and you can get near him without taking damage. Those attacks are the Vine attack, where multiple branches emerge from his face, and my favorite, the really long fireball charge that is screaming at you to hit him. The blast from the projectile is a joke with Havel's Great Shield, so this became a free opening with 0 risk. The only other opening which I wouldn't count on is when he spawns back in after teleporting. I didn't use this opening unless my Immolation was still active. Otherwise, it wasn't worth losing health for such a short window to attack. However, it was this attack that determined the outcome of the fight. I knew he was a couple ticks away from dying, so I went all out and cast it anyway, and, as luck would have it, he spawned right on top of me, sealing his fate and ending a nearly 40-minute fight. Out of spite, I didn't leave the throne as he would have wanted. I just got the default ending. Thank you to everyone who made this video possible. I couldn't have done this without the creative ideas from the community. All of your ideas, whether they were difficult to complete or not, contributed to the video in a significant way and made this playthrough unbelievably enjoyable and frustrating at the same time. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one.